Now, this is the best French fry in the world. Now go ahead and put it in the comments. Change my mind. Now, I'm sure some of you are thinking, Thomas, man, how can you call this the best French fries in the world? Have you not tried the fries from Café des Musées in France? Now, the reason I call this the best French fries in the world is simply I enjoy it. That's it, nothing else. I know some of you are secretly agreeing with me, even though you might be embarrassed too. So obviously what I consider best does not mean the best to you. Now, the reason I have to address this point is that my thumbnail uses the word best. The problem is by reading the comments, I notice some people really take it literally when a YouTuber calls something the best. Guys, there is no best in audio, just a question of taste. Now, if you absolutely want to talk about the best, you have to be very specific. For example, what is the best single-ended Class A amp that uses 300B? Around 1005. What is the best R2R DAC? Around 1005. Now, that I can have a conversation with you. The Willsenton R300 tube integrated amp is the best amp of the year for me because I love a warm, colored, and smooth sound. And that's it. That's what the R300 is, period. Not that it is the most refined, nor is it the most dynamic. Nope. It simply is my kind of sound. So how good is the Willsenton R300? 2 people bought it after trying my review sample. All my audio buddies who are used to high-end system heard it at my place with a specific speaker, said it is amazing. So people who bought it were blown away by the R300. Now, before you rush out to buy one, hold on a minute. Just because I love it and a lot of people I know bought it and love it, it means nothing. Unless you have drank the same audiophile Kool-Aid as I have, you might not like it. In fact, one of my audio buddies, Mr. Vintage, although he recognized the strength of the R300, yeah, but it's not for him. Why? He prefers neutral sounding gear and the R300 is too colored for him. I have a Patreon who bought it based on my recommendation. He sold it after spending months with it. So I am glad at least he agreed with me how I described the performance of the Willsenton R300. Loic tried it and thought, yeah, it was just okay. So I want to use this video to get you excited about the R300, but I also want to set the correct expectation if you decided to buy this best integrated amp of the year. So, my audio buddies, today let's talk about why McDonald's French fries are the best French fries in the world. A big thank you to China-hifi for sending me this unit for review. If you happen to catch the upgrade bug, or I just want to buy anything bug after this video, give them a chance. Now, I just hope your significant other will forgive me for tempting you to buy it, even if you don't need it. This is a single-ended Class A tube integrated amp. Now, for those who don't know what that means, it doesn't matter. Just know that single-ended amps usually have a unique sound, due to the lack of crossover distortion, mostly amazing mid-range, and usually not very powerful unless you get a super expensive one by reverse mortgaging your house. In this case, the Willsenton R300 is only 8 watt, so don't worry about needing to eat instant noodles for years to save up for it. The Willsenton R300 only goes for about 1,000 USD, well, before shipping and taxes and tips, you know. Super affordable in the world of hi-fi. The amp uses 2 300B tubes, 2 5U 4G rectifiers, 1 6L7, 2 6SN7 tubes. Now, why is this a good thing? Putting aside the debate if you think a rectifier tube will make a difference in sound, if you want to try different tubes, tube rolling, you can easily find affordable tubes for this amp with all the tubes I just listed, except the 300B. 300B tubes are not cheap. Luckily, the 300B that comes with the amp is decent, and changing 300B tubes on this amp has minimal effect, so your wallet is relatively safe. Now, I'll come back to tube rolling a bit later. For those new to the tube world, 300B is the holy grail of all tubes if you are looking for that sweet mid-range. My definition of sweetness, it rolls off the top end just perfectly, so it makes the presentation sounds very pleasant. For me, it happens in the upper mid-range. Once you eliminate the sharp edges on the top end, it is pleasant to listen to. Now the hard part is if you roll off the top end, especially like the treble part, the system can sound a bit dull, a bit veiled. So getting this roll off, this smoothness right, is not easy. I've always been told 300B has a lush, rich, smooth range. All the 300B amps I've tried kind of have it if you pair it with the right speaker, like the Lii Song A50, as I mentioned in my video, only with some speakers where I find that magic. Now, Class A for me is usually lean sounding. Now, I get people criticizing me for saying that. I eventually changed my word to linear sounding. But between me and my audio buddies, like Mr. Vintage, we call it lean sounding. Many of you know the Lii Song A12, which uses EL34. I see comments from actual buyers saying the same thing. They were expecting a rich, warm, fat, juicy sound, but they said they got a lean sounding amp. Now, mind you, the mid-range on the Lii Song A12 has body, but it's not a fat, warm sounding amp. Now, what makes this 300B Willsenton special to me is unlike most Class A tube amp I listen to, it is not lean sounding. Warm, thick, and fat. It will not sound lean with the right speaker. It is colored with some speakers, chocolate honey warm. The top end does sparkle and is refined enough. Sure, it's not the same level as a $3,000 amp, nor does it have the same level of clarity as higher end amps, but I would argue good enough. All my audio buddies wished it was a bit more detailed and refined, but come on man, $1,000 amp, be realistic. It is okay. The mid-range is where you have the biggest chance of falling in love with it. The right amount of roll off, smooth, and let me repeat for the 10th time, very pleasant to listen to. Just enough detail and texture despite it being smooth. Now, if you want a lot of texture, yeah, then maybe go for a tube amp that uses, I don't know, EL34. The R300 does have it, but for some, maybe not enough texture because it is too smooth. Next, tube airy soundstage and decent instrument separation. Not world class, but okay. Finally, unbelievable dynamic bass, rich and the right amount of kick. All the 300B amps I've tried, bass, man, is on the bottom of the list. The R300 has so much bass that it does not make sense how it is possible for an 8-watt amp to generate this much bass. The reason why I prefer the R300 way above the R8, because R8 for me the bass is a bit overdone. The R300 is just right, a much more balanced sound compared to the R8. I personally even prefer it over the R800i, but that's just me. I like honey chocolate syrup. So let's move on to the negatives. 8 watt. And with 8 watt, it's hard to predict how it will sound with your speaker. You see, with my super easy, tube-friendly 92 dB Silverline Sonata speakers, it was jaw-dropping. Everyone who came over just got blown away with the combo. Now, when Mr. Canted took the R300 home to drive his Focus Pro 2, 91 dB sensitivity, sure, he said, yeah, there's bass and it sounds good, but the dynamic contrast, especially microdynamics, is just not there. It was not as impressive when compared to my home. You see, most people define if an amp can drive a speaker by volume. If you can reach a decent volume, then for many people, it means the amp can drive the speaker. My audio buddies and me look at this differently. Can the amp control the woofer? Is the dynamic contrast there? How about the microdynamics? If it is lacking, then for us, nope, this amp cannot drive that speaker. Okay, however, please keep in mind this is just my definition and not what 90% of the people's definition. Another example, Mr. Jazz heard the R300. He bought one because he said, guys, man, for this price and performance, I have to buy it. Recently, he bought a pair of KEF Reference 5. He said, although he can get decent volume with the R300, something is just missing. We're like, really, man? You want to use an 8-watt amp to drive a $25,000 speaker with 5 drivers? Be realistic. The key here is he can get okay volume, but as I said, you need more than that to really bring a speaker to life. Mr. Klipsch, who owns a pair of La Scala, bought the R300 based on my recommendation. He also said, yes, it has more bass than his own amp, but it is a bit lacking in the dynamics. Now keep in mind, all these three speakers I just mentioned are over 15 grand. My takeaway from this is the amp will blow you away, but it all depends on your speaker. I don't care if they say it's 91 dB, man, some speakers are not easy to drive. Another example, Mr. 707. He tried the R300 with the Polk Audio 703 speakers, and for him it was a no. In his case, now for the 703 owners out there who are interested in buying this amp, to give you the whole story, when I lent Mr. 707 the R300, I also lent him the Galleon 15 watt Class A amp that's about to hit the market. And once he plugged in the 15 watt, like he said, forget it, I'm not touching the R300. So it is possible he did not give the R300 a fair chance. I did lend it to Loic. He said for the money, it is very good value, undisputed, but he was not blown away by it. I think this has to do with him matching it with easy to drive Lii Song drivers. I'll tell that story in another video in the future. It sounds good with Lii Song drivers, but I find Lii Song drivers sound even better with lean sounding amps that uses EL34. Anyways, a story for another day. Next, another thing you have to be aware of, as I mentioned earlier, Mr. Vintage recognized it sounded really good, but was too colored for him. Okay, I'm sorry to all the R300 owners that have pointed out all the negatives. This is Thomas and Stereo after all. I don't make negative reviews, but whenever I make a video, I will share all the experiences, the positive and the negative. Finally, you have to think about the warranty because you're buying overseas. So it's not like you can go back to the store and yell at the salesperson asking for your money back if something goes wrong. Well, you can always send an email written in with all caps. So what about the positives? The amp is dead silent, looks expensive, is nicely designed, and has a fantastic finish. It is somewhat heavy. Now in my book, that is a sign of quality. Now as I mentioned earlier, everyone who came to my home and listened to it with my Silverline Sonata speakers were blown away. Everything you wanted in an amplifier and more was present with this amp. Mr. Cantor offered to buy my amp on the spot. Took out his wallet. Mr. Jazz bought one. He said at that price, man, he has to buy it. Even though I mentioned earlier Mr. Klipsch sold his R300, he admitted at this price, it is really good. And he had to think a few days before deciding to sell it. You see, he has a $10,000 musical fidelity amp, so he was comparing the R300 to that. Next, I like how my audio buddy Mr. Carver describes it. For the sound, wow, it does have some magic in there for sure. Initial impressions are that it seems to be adding harmonics, enhancing spaciousness, and giving a brighter, more illuminated soundstage. In my case, for the 100th time, I love the smoothness of the mid-range. This harmonic richness. I love how much meat on the bone the upper bass has, and dude, you will never believe the amount of bass this amp can give you. Next, I lent it to Jason. You see, Jason's system is around 30 grand and more. Now he has these nice Onix tube monoblocks. I think they were 7 grand a pair. I lent him the R300 to listen to, and next thing you know, yep, he put the $7,000 amp up for sale and bought the Willsenton R300. Yes, you heard that right. Sure, he said, yeah, the R300 might not be as detailed, as refined as the Onix, but it has soul. It can connect to the music. Now, keep in mind, he has 95 dB Omega single driver speakers with a rail sub. Finally, I lent it to Mark. Now, Mark owns the Decor UFO2 tube amplifier, a 2-watt amp, and he is really happy with it. Mark's top 3 tube amplifier. Number 1, Decor UFO2. Number 2, the Lexman SQ150M. And number 3, the Decor Tori MK5. Guess what? The R300 is now his second favorite after the Decor. He said definitely more dynamic than the UFO2. For me, it is just so liquid with the Silverline Sonata. Now, I did try with other speakers. None as good as my Sonata, but overall, it was quite enjoyable with many speakers I listened to as long as it is easy to drive. Now, in today's sound demo, I used the Focal 1008BE, 87 dB sensitivity. It sounds good until a certain volume, but once I start pushing it, it does sound a bit thin and strained. So around 70-ish dB sounds good. I think the takeaway is, if you like a warm, sweet sound, the R300 is worth your time. If you have relatively easy to drive speakers. Now, if you want to listen at louder volume above 80 dB, then ideally you want an easy to drive speaker for maximum performance. I'm not saying you cannot use a speaker with normal sensitivity, but if you want maximum performance with minimal chance of sounding lean, then ideally an easy to drive speaker. Let's end the video now with tube rolling. Let me show you the tubes I have tried with the R300. Now, I have a lot of 300B at my place, so I was able to test different 300B on it. Some were expensive, some were cheap. Well, relatively cheap because there are no cheap 300B tubes. My only regret is I did not get to try the famous, legendary Western electric 300B tubes with the R300. You see, Mr. Cantor has a set, but you know, just 2 tubes. It's close to $2,000. The last thing I want is to plug it in and poof, it blew, and I can't say I'm sorry. The interesting part about the R300, changing the 300B tube, is not really worth it. The sound changes, just a bit, but not enough to justify the price. Like, I put these Sophia tubes in, I think they're like almost 500 bucks a pair. Sure, it was a bit smoother, but totally not worth a $500 investment. When you change the other tubes, now that makes more of a difference relative to the price. For example, Jason found the rectifier tube made a big difference. Mr. Carver found the 6SN7 made a big difference. Now, I personally did not have the time to test. I only tested the 300B. So what I did, I changed all the tubes at once, and the result is, okay, yeah, the amp sounded a bit more transparent, sharper, brighter, and maybe a bit more refined. The takeaway is, yeah, go have fun with tube rolling. See, some amplifier I buy from Asia, you can try tube rolling all you want and it makes no difference. The Willsenton does make a difference. I did record a sound demo of when I first changed all the tubes to TAD tubes. Okay, in the sound demo, you can see how bright it is, and keep in mind that this is before break-in. Like, I only have 15 minutes on the tubes, but you can see how big of a gap there is with tube rolling. Of course, once break-in, the amp might sound smoother with the new tubes. I'm just trying to make a point here. So that's it. In short, if your speakers matches well with it, I tell you now, if you're someone who is more into that sweet vocal with a balanced presentation, oh my God. Forget the Willsenton R8. Forget even the Willsenton R800i. The R300 is the amp to get. Yes, I probably pissed off a lot of people in this video because many of you would be like, Thomas, how do I know if the R300 will work well with my speaker? Well, R300 happy owners, put it in the comment section, what speakers are you using? This is one amp I will never sell. It will be in my collection forever. Well, never say never. Okay, later.
It's not defined. Won't you kiss me? Won't you play? Won't you try me? Ain't no way I could deny you. I could stray. Won't you kiss me? Ain't no way. Come and try me now. So I never